Good morning and welcome everyone. This is Michael Bartlett with Deep Dives with New Perspectives with Merrylin LeBlanc on Tuesday, the 29th of September. How are you doing today, Merrylin?
I'm doing pretty well. And you, Michael?
I'm doing well too. I'm very heartened with the unearthing of President Trump's tax records.
You would be being an accountant of sorts, a person who pays attention to finances and knows some of the interrelationships that go on in the finance world among different types of businesses.
And what you can really write off and what you really can't.
Right. Well, one of the most amazing things about that revelation for us was that on Monday?
It happened on Sunday, but it happened over the weekend.
It
And then
happened
I
over.
think it really hit the presses like on Monday, of course, at the beginning of the business week. But I think the New York Times
Oh, yeah.
popped the story on Sunday.
And the moon was in Aquarius, and on Monday morning at 9:34 our time, Mountain Time, the moon moved into Pisces. And what's interesting to me in that, I was thinking of the Pisces moon, but is it was this news came to us while the moon was in transiting Donald Trump's seventh house of relationships, including his enemies.
Right.
People who are not necessarily on his side. And boy, he's got both. I mean, we know he's got his followers and he's got his, won't you go away and go lead your private life, Mr. Trump, and let us go on with the reality that we believe in, some of us, and do your own thing. And then moved into his eighth house. And what's interesting, about both of those, I mean, the Aquarius thing is that it brings up, Trump's hopes and wishes for his allies and, having his enemies be set aside. And he didn't turn out to be the winner in that case. And also, I look at the seventh house, not everybody does, as a place of justice where vying sides come to some kind of a just agreement or acknowledgement. Whether some people some of our relationships, we can think of our friends, our acquaintances, our associates, etc. We can think of it. Some of them we're already on the same page and in agreement. And others we have to make adjustments for. Well, now Mr. Trump has to make adjustments. And if we go into his eighth house, which has to do with his shared resources, his investments, like his real estate, his TV show, where he's had to get other people to even invest in him. It's Pisces. And what interests me about Pisces is the ability to deceive people as well as be on the same page with people. And also the fact that the reality is not always clear. It's a mirage. And the thing about his joint resources is, in some of our opinions, at least in mine and several people whose news I follow, is that it's really a mirage. It's like Trump Tower is not what we think it is, really. And when you go to the rulers of his Pisces eighth house, I didn't go to the rulers of his seventh house. Maybe we go back to that. But it's Neptune and Jupiter, which are both in Libra at the time he was born. But the Neptune in the chart that I use, and I know you use equal houses, I'm using Coke here. His Neptune is in his second house, so personal resources. Again, there's a fog there. There's like a mirage. I mean,
He's a showman. I mean,
What? Yeah.
Neptune's also a show person, right? I mean, that's putting forth an image, and he's really great at putting forth an image.
Well, this goes to his, that house in this system, and it could be a different system. It could be a different house, because we're not talking about his ascendant or midheaven in terms of the
Right,
system I use. We're talking about his second house of
right,
resources.
right.
It is ruled by Virgo, which is a mercurial sign, and Mercury is in his chart in Cancer, which is another water sign. So you get this kind of non-boundary sense. He kind of his appeal to people, to some people, has a familial sound to it. Oh, we're on the same page, we're in the same family. And of course, now families don't always get on the same page, but what we know about his family, and I have not read that biography that his niece wrote, although I ran into a friend who's um, quite astute. His was an English professor at one point in her life, and owned a used bookstore here at one point in her life. And a lot of people who've been in Santa Fe a long time know her, but I won't mention her name. But she did read the biography, and it was interesting. And so it was sort of sparked me that maybe if I get through other things that I really want to read that I haven't read yet, I might dabble in it. Maybe if he wins the presidency again, I will, just to get a little bit of a different view about him. But I'm not holding back on that. I'm not hoping for that. So yeah, he does have the people that really are with him are really with him. I mean, and you get that. And it seems like when you look at all the polls and the figures, the man has maintained this group, just like you would hope in most cases people have their family support. He's got that kind of support with whatever he says. But then the Jupiter's in his third house, which kind of and Neptune is very close to it might be in another house system, it would be in the third house as well. So it kind of, and if you do equal chart, so we would put it in the same house, I would think.
Whole sign runs are pretty much the same. Yeah, I mean, I see, I see him, with that Leo first house, and with that Mars on his ascendant, I see him as a maverick too. And I mean, I just everything I see about him is just showmanship. I mean, and he's really good at selling whatever product he thinks I mean, he's one of those people who can sell ice to, to Eskimos and sell hot water to people in hell.
Yeah. Exactly. So yes, yes, but it's sort of the hyperbole is there with him, and that he can spin things the way he wants to spin them, and it takes some critical thinking to go, well, wait a minute. So anyway, those are things that really hit me about the revelation, but also about his income, and having, even though he's got Mercury as a ruler of his own personal resources, that Mercury in Cancer, Cancer is a sign that represents, as ruled by the moon, the most changes, not necessarily heavy duty changes, but shifting. I mean, if we look at all the planets, the wanderers up there in the sky, the moon changes the most often. Every 2.5 to 3 days, it changes into a different phase, and its shape changes. So there's an indication that his income is not steady, is not, solid. Doesn't mean that he doesn't make some good money periodically, and he certainly did with The Apprentice.
He certainly did with the U.S. government. $72 million tax refund.
Yes, and how did he do that?
The write-offs are very interesting.
Well, this also gives me hope in our institutions. There are lawyers out there, and if we have some time, we'll get to the law. There are lawyers out there who have a sense of the law and what's right and what's wrong.
Well, the scary
Not
to
that
me,
they
this,
always argue for the right.
but for me, like I think the one thing that Trump has been really phenomenal about is showing the U.S. people and its elected officials how flawed our system is. How, when you think about the drama that they put Obama through for his birth certificate, and then we're just now in the last 2 months, last few months of Trump's presidency, and just now his tax returns are being released. Why is that even remotely permitted? Why is that even remotely allowed? That should be one of the
What being allowed? You mean the fact that he was denying to disclose those?
Exactly. I think, as an aspect of, applying for the presidency, because it's a job like anything else, I think one's tax returns, what one has contributed to the country that made you wealthy in the first place, what have you given back? What are you contributing? Oh, you're paying less than a firefighter, you're paying less than a teacher, you're paying less than the person who is actually at poverty level. And you're not only that, you're also making some years where you're making millions upon millions of dollars, which basically means you've never, ever, 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 ever paid taxes.
Yeah, well, Trump isn't the only one. I mean, the fact that you and I probably paid more taxes than Bezos is disturbing, very disturbing.
It's not only disturbing, I find it really dishonorable. I mean, I think why, I mean, there's this interesting inherent sense, and Trump shows that extreme, this idea like, oh, how do we get by with paying as little back into the system? How do we make the system beat the system? But usually that was kind of built in with this idea like, okay, I'm going to give some to charity, I'm going to do these other things. There's been nothing that Trump has ever done that hasn't been about him. That's where I see the Mars on the ascendant, that maverick thing in Leo. I mean, he's the lower functioning aspect of Leo, the self-centeredness, not the self-centering person, but self-centered. Look at him. It's funny because as you start talking about those topics, and then we want to get into the new his nominee, Amy Coney Barrett. It's an interesting combination between their two charts and what he's wanting to accomplish in this arena. And my question is, one more thing. My question is, if now that his financials have been released, will he start facing some more criminal charges of some sort that, in some ways one would argue, are the things that he accomplished during his presidency null and void?
Ooh. Well, there was this whole argument too, other than impeachment, that you can't prosecute. I'm sorry, persecution is.
He needs to be persecuted.
Talk about Neptunian things. A sitting president. There are things about our Constitution that are disturbing. Like, for example, taking literally the Second Amendment out of a context. There was no militia. I mean, there was the Revolutionary Army, but they disbanded. There wasn't any set militia to the country when the Bill of Rights was written. And to take it literally, and yet to not take other amendments literally, like, for example, the right to vote, et cetera, that blacks didn't get until, or who can vote. I mean, we changed. I mean, thank goodness we've recognized that all humans who are citizens are born in the United States or naturalized in the process of becoming a citizen of the United States are eligible to vote. That it took us over 200 years to, or almost 200 years.
Well, sorry, I'm just going to argue the fact, because I think, the truth is there still continues to be a way that is making it hard for people of color to vote. When you think about,
well, that's the obvious Republican agenda, where
right.
they set up all these roadblocks instead of making it the easiest process. And why is that? Because, and I had actually an Australian tell me this, where everybody is in Australia, they are all required to vote or they're penalized. There's a fine for not voting, and that's true in some other countries, I believe, as well.
Oh, I like that.
But this particular Australian, and this was maybe over 10 years ago that I was told this, was that when the public at large, when everybody at large is required to vote and given enough information about the issue that they're voting on, the pros and cons, et cetera, of it, that invariably, and there's a study done in Stanford, deliberative democracy or deliberative justice, I forget, I remember on KSFR, Craig Barnes interviewed the Stanford professor who started this institute, that when people get enough information on an issue, that they invariably vote for what will serve the majority of people in the most equitable, honest way.
The greater good.
And we avoid that. And it, you know, to the point, and you know, I this is to me part of the Jupiterian Sag nature of the Sibley chart that we use for the Declaration of Independence, that there is exaggeration by a few. This is the Jupiter in Cancer, which is a nice, wonderful place for Jupiter to be in terms of change and evolution, but for the individual. But there are, just as our founding was with a select few moneyed, propertied men who chose this, that has prevailed in our country. And I think that is with this return of Pluto to where it was when our country began and opposing that Cancer energy. This is our opportunity to bring a more equitable distribution on many levels, not just the taxation, but also on the voting level. This is the revolution we're in. This is a key part of Black Lives Matter and other issues that we have to face.
Yeah,
So,
and I actually was reading today, like on the daily briefing from the New York Times, you know, that actually the idea of free colleges is coming back. You know, the idea of like, you know, promoting educations, and they've actually, you know, done a study because they were saying like, oh, is it just going to be another one of those things where it's just going to help wealthy people not to have to pay the bill? Or, you know, what happens, and what they found statistically is that when it's taken care of, as long as the education is of a good enough quality, more people will end up staying in it longer and completing it if those fees are paid for them. So, I mean, it's really good. And that just helps everyone. Having an educated populace is, you know, I am an Aquarian. I can't help it, just as you are. I mean, I want to have people who are educated and understand what the facts are. In California, what I loved is, you know, every time the ballot, you know, every time election time came around, you got a big, thick, you know, thing explaining every single aspect. I moved here to New Mexico and I'm like, oh, is there an election coming up? And you don't get anything. You have to do all this work for yourself. There's no.
Well, all of that costs money, which means more taxes. And that is the whole thing. I mean, that in a state whose revenue is quite limited. I mean, one of the things about California, you know, is it's been in the top 10, 11, and it could be a nation unto itself compared to some nations in the world in terms of the economy. God knows what it's going to be like with climate disruption, unfortunately.
We have less people in our whole state than the LA basin. I mean, so, I mean, it's not, right, I mean, economically, you know, per ratio, we're not, hard, yeah.
It's hard to compare the two. Right. Because of the economy of this state. And there's been a conservative element in this state, even though Democrats and Republicans have gone back and forth. And I know that last year there was a concerted effort to get rid of some Democrats in the legislature, the state legislature, who were voting extremely conservative, which had prevented certain measures that have to do with healthcare and the electoral process, as well as education. And so I think with the coming legislative period in the state in January, we're going to see some changes. I hope that's the case. But it is an economic issue. It's
well, my point is, I think, you know, when one isn't, you know, alluding back to your point too, is if people aren't aware of what it is that's going on, they aren't really going to typically make the effort to try and learn about it. I mean, what I appreciated about the California thing, and I mean, it
I
was
did too.
done in
I'm totally.
very inexpensive paper. I mean, it came out and it gave the pros and the cons. It showed a primary argument for each side. It was just like something that was great because I would just sit there in the evening, have a glass of wine and read through it, you know, as much as I could take. And some of it, like, I don't even understand what they're talking about. And then, you know, because there's also, it's the legalese. But, you know, if there isn't some sort of a summary, if there isn't some sort of a way of people to get to understand that, they just leave it. And then that's why we have such low voting turnout. And that's, you know, that's why it's easy to control countries. That's what's going on right now. When you have an apathetic populace, when you have a 25 to 30% turnout rate for elections, you know, that's not a lot of people who are voting in. That's not a majority of the people. Those are just the concerned citizens, and the concerned citizens aren't always in the best interest of the country or the community.
One of the other things about that ballot that I always appreciated too is if you moved, if you wanted to vote, you had to re-register, because they would not forward, they would automatically take you off the books if you moved. Then the mail system, delivery system would not forward those. They would send them back. And so it was another way of checking on people being registered at the right address, in the right precinct, et cetera.
I.e. protecting against voter fraud.
Right, which is really all the studies have shown that it's such a minimal percentage of voting cases that it's really not worth our time and energy. Not
if
at
they're
all.
going to happen, they're probably more likely to happen like on a more of a municipal level or something on a local level where people are wanting to like take advantage of, or control of a local thing, and they actually can try and do that. But like on a national level, that, I mean, except now that we're talking electronic voting, that's one aspect where it can be, because all you have to do is hack into a system and do an insertion and oh, we just had 4 million more votes. Oh, well, who are those people? They're in Russia? They're in China? But
Oh
speaking
my.
of which, so then, you know, this kind of leads into the idea, you know, it's getting very interesting on the thing. Like tonight, we're going to see the debates. I don't usually watch it, but I'm going to tune in for a little bit because I want to see whether Biden's going to find a pair. And you know, I don't mean to be derogatory or anything in that sense, but it's just like I'd like for, you know, him to stand up and say some of these things to the president. And you know, I'm interested to see whether Trump is going to like lay across the podium like it's his own personal, you know, kitty pad. I mean, talk about Leo. I mean, the way he uses podiums now is kind of creepy for an elected official, well, unelected official, let's say. And you know, and then now we've got, you know, where he's pushing for the new justice, and what an interesting chart she has. I watched a couple of videos with her in there, and you know, I kind of wonder, is she going to be one of those people who's going to stay staunch her whole time, or is she going to be one of those people who, like Justice Roberts, kind of went in and started showing slightly different colors?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Right off the bat, though, one of the you were about to say something about the commonality or something that interests me. One of the things that really interests me, and it has to do with a lot of research I've been doing astrologically lately, and that's been on the nodes and the eclipse series, et cetera. And both Amy Coney Barrett and Donald Trump were born close to a lunar eclipse. There was a lunar eclipse later the same day that Trump was born. And 2 days after Amy Coney Barrett was born, there was a lunar eclipse. Different series, different kinds of energy. But the lunar eclipses, you know, are always full moons. And there's something about them that has to do with how a person manifests something and the absolute need for them to do some kind of manifestation. And in the case of Amy Coney Barrett, I don't have an exact time. I haven't seen one posted yet, but so if we did like a solar chart where Amy's sun is on the ascendant, her south node would be at the end of the sixth house, or, you know, on the descendant. And one of the focuses of that has to do either with service or justice, as I see it, relationships that bring about some kind of justice. And what's really disturbing, and I want to know more about this, and I hope it comes out in the hearings, is a couple weeks ago, are you still seeing my face? Because I flipped to something else. A couple of weeks ago on Democracy Now!, they talked about Amy Coney Barrett and her involvement with a conservative Catholic group called People of Praise. And oops, Michael, are you there?
I'm still here.
Because I lost you and I'm not.
Oh, you just have it. It's probably just somewhere in there. You're fine now.
Okay, I'm there, but I'm not seeing myself. That's all. Whatever. So this People of Praise group, they talked about quite a bit. And at one point in their past history, they used to call the women the handmaids. And when Atwood, you know, had her book on The Handmaid's Tale, they changed it. I don't know at what point. They might have, if in that show, which you can always go to democracynow.org and find in the archives that particular show. But it was very disturbing to me. It's very patriarchal. There was a woman who actually, I believe she belonged to the group at the end of the show, who talked about it and how she was chastised and excluded, and it just, I felt like we were back in the days of the Pilgrims or something, you know, and the witches being burned at the stake. Not that they did things like that, but or put them in the stocks and whatever. And it's just very disturbing to have. There are conservative justices, and I'm thinking of Scalia, who would say things that I just, you know, as I understand it, they call themselves traditionalists. What was the meaning at the time? Well, I'm sorry, but things change, and some things have changed. I mean, just take taxes for one thing. I mean, we are evolutionary beings. And we've seen that. I mean, there are things about our humanity today that we knew nothing about 200, 100, 200, 300, 500, 600 years ago. On the other hand, you know, and you look at the Greek philosophers, I mean, you go, oh my God. I mean, and the other traditions also had philosophers who were very wise old souls. But we've learned things even on the physical plane about our physical being that, you know, we can use for good and we can use for evil. So I'm quite disturbed about any justice who is so who has a rigid form. And you know, I have argued with my Catholic friends from childhood days. I have argued about abortion and about when does life begin. And I have yet to find a true spiritual teacher. I'm not talking about a religious teacher. I see those as distinctions, who would say that life begins before you take that first breath. That up until that time, you are parasitic on a host. And in the human sense, you are parasitic on your mother. Right. And I think that woman, regardless of your beliefs, has the right to choose. I'm not saying that she should choose abortion. That's not my decision. It's her decision. She has a right to it, and I will respect that right.
Well, one of the things that I find very intriguing, it's another one of these Republican flips. I mean, I grew up in an age when Russia was a bad word and Catholic was a bad word.
Communism.
So I find it so ironic to be in this time period where our conservative we're going to dip into the past kind of thing, are now accepting these, you know, now we're going to put a Catholic Chief Justice. I mean, a justice, and I'm just floored by it. But it's this interesting thing. Yeah, I mean, you know, I can see different ways that her chart plays out. I mean, I see her with a Cancer moon. I see her with a Venus in Pisces. But she's also got this, what we call a grand trine, which typically a grand trine is something that happens when planets are all in the same element and are in supportive relationships with one another. And what she has is she has the, how did it go? It went the.
What does she have in, what does she have, what's element are you talking
So
about?
we're talking about in Earth, she's got Saturn at 29 degrees of Taurus. Talk about fixity. She's got Mercury at 24 degrees of Capricorn, but then her Pluto is out of sign. It's in, but it's at the very earliest degree of Libra, Pluto in Libra. So she's got Pluto, Saturn, and Mercury all in strong relationships with one another. And then that that Saturn goes to an opposition to Neptune in Sagittarius. You know, and here we were talking about, you know, not only, you know, our country's aspect of with the Jupiter and Sagittarius, she has Jupiter at the very last degree of Sagittarius. She has Neptune at the earliest degree, 4 degrees of Sagittarius. This is someone who has, like, you know, can come up with an amazing ideology and belief structure. She's got Mars in Aries, opposing her Uranus in Libra. I mean, there's ways that she has a lot of fixity in her chart, and where I think, you know, she can see things in a certain way. But then people talk about the office of the Supreme Court, the energy, the body of it itself, that actually transforms individuals when they go in there. There's something that kind of tempers right-leaning individuals and tempers left-leaning individuals, and hopefully puts them in touch with a little bit more of a play of what's going on in the feel of what the country is. But now, you know, in the last few elections, in the last, you know, few decades, the politicization of the Supreme Court has become really great, where, you know, in the last election was determined by the Supreme Court, which is not really a good idea. It's not good for two sections of our government, you know, the justice wing and or judicial wing and the executive wing, to be in cahoots to this level. It becomes a little more dogmatic.
Well, you know, it kind of boils down to our electoral process also, which needs drastically to be transformed. And it looks like the only way we're really doing that is by having states adopt different practices, like saying that, you know, all the delegates to the electoral college must vote for the candidate who got the popular vote, and not be able to change it from that, is one way of getting around what the Constitution has. Because unfortunately, to change our Constitution, we're overdue for a constitutional convention, because to change it will impact the very people who are benefiting from it, i.e. the legislature, the president, the judges. And I don't think that judges should be judges for life. I think they should have term limits. And I'm not sure exactly what the optimal would be there in that regard, but I think that's part of the problem, because, you know, if you look at where I could have been your teenage mom. Actually, I could have, you know, I could have been a late.
You would have been a little tight, but you would have been a little young, but definitely possible. Yeah.
But in any event, we have different views as we age from younger people, and we become more distant from them in some ways, in terms of the different views. Right. And yes, age gives us a lot of experience, and wisdom comes from experience, besides intellect but doesn't always. Right. And so consequently, I think there's a point at which, and people have argued even about when Ruth Bader Ginsburg first got ill, I believe was during the Obama administration. Why didn't she step down then and let Obama? I'm not, it's just as a part of a conversation that I don't have the answers to, and I just find it interesting to pursue that. But again, it's this kind of political play that you kind of think that justices should be above the politics. And unfortunately, it's becoming more and more the case. And justices should be on the side of what is going to improve society as versus making society more cruel and demanding. I mean, I don't think that we do justice to society by putting people for drug offenses that aren't terribly serious in jail. I don't
Well, unless
see
you
it.
capitalize the prison system and you're making money
Right,
on them, which is what's
right,
going on right now. But I
right.
mean, that's what's
This
very
again is
interesting
another
about
Pisces kind of energy of deception. What's the motivating factor?
Right. I mean, and that's what I think is very interesting where they're trying to, I mean, she has a sun conjunct her north node in Aquarius. On one hand, I mean, you and I are both sun in Aquarius. We know there's, it's ruled traditionally by Saturn and modern by Uranus. And I think, without understanding those two parts, you cannot really understand what an Aquarian is. But one aspect of the Aquarian nature is this dogmatism. When we believe in something, we can get really petty and nasty. We can get very Saturnian in our presentation of it and in our belief structure of it. And when you, like what you're saying is like, better for humanity, but it can also be this, these are the rules in order for you to be a part of my humanity.
Right. What's interesting, me and the Sabian symbols, her sun is at the 8th degree rounded up of Aquarius, and it's mannequins in a store window. And so it's, this perception of the ideal of, and just the little that I know about her life. I mean, there's a kind of an idealism that she lives by that's a little too plastic, in my opinion.
Well, she doesn't, she could probably use a good a few Scorpio friends or a few, a little bit of Scorpionic or Persephone-like experiences of what life is like. I mean, I think one of the hardest parts about what's going on right now is this, it's the idealization, and here she's got Jupiter and Neptune in Sagittarius. If that is an idealization, I don't know what is, of what the right way for people to live. She's also got all those planets in Libra, right human relationship to her is going to look a very certain way. But, the thing with Aquarius can sit up there in that tower and say, this is the way that everyone needs to live. But if Aquarius hasn't gotten down there, it makes me think of the Amish people. And I forget what that term is. They have like, when the kids are like 18, from 18 and 19, they get like this, it's a wanderlust period. It's something like
They get to
wanderlust.
go to the city and experience the whole.
They get to rut around, basically. They get to go and feel what it's like to experience freedom. There's nothing that really kind of prepares them for that because they're so protected in a sense. But there's this thing about going out there and really getting to see what life is like. And from their standpoint, their belief structure is the devil. Either the devil's going to tempt them away from their faith, or the devil's going to tempt them to their own individuality, because that's really more what the devil is, like having us each be responsible what our truth is and acting appropriately in relationship to that. I think is really what that dynamic is that plays out. But when you have someone saying, oh, you can't do these things, you can't have abortions. I mean, I don't know, like I think I maybe I'm just too idealistic, but I just can't see our country going back to like outlawing abortions. I mean, maybe that's just really stupid and short-sighted on my part, but I just
Well, you were just describing, I have to say, her North Node in Aquarius at 6 degrees rounded up is a performer in a ritual mystery play. This is about the mini masks that people can wear. And it's sort of like we're already seeing from like Democracy Now's discussion of her, how she has, I mean, it's hard to imagine her personal life and then her sitting on the court. And I know that the question of dogma came up in terms of law. And she's had to answer that question in some settings where, you know, she'll follow the law as versus the dogma. But the Supreme Court in recent times, and they've been criticized for it from various sides, have, you know, been characterized as establishing law as versus interpreting law, which are two different things. And they're also making it a little harder for the legislature to make laws. And their hearing comes to play in terms of our legislatures who, for the most part, end up having these think tanks, especially I'm thinking of the Republicans, but I imagine the Democrats also do, have these think tanks come up with laws. And, you know, with the Affordable Care Act being in jeopardy with a hearing that'll begin in November, I believe, at the Supreme Court level on the Affordable Care Act, it's almost, you know, disturbing that our legislature has a difficult time making a law that benefits people. And the Affordable Care Act was not perfect. I'm not saying that. I mean, you know, if it's going to be Medicare for all, meaning anybody can get into it, just leave it alone at that, because I'm on an Advantage plan, but I'm at that point where I do have Medicare. And I'll tell you, and I did take straight Medicare initially, but because of things that were covered, I went to an Advantage plan.
I think everyone should have a supplement.
But what I'm trying to say is Medicare was of all the healthcare coverage I've had in my whole life. I had Kaiser Permanente in California, Blue Cross in California as well. All the coverage I've ever had in my life, Medicare is the easiest. All you need are doctors who take it. But, you know, in terms of red tape, in terms of paperwork, et cetera, couldn't be easier. And for people to put out things like, oh, you won't be able to go to the doctor of your choice, that is absolutely false. Right. All you need is for the doctors a mandate to say to the doctors, if you want to have a practice in these areas, because Medicare for all is not going to cover
your plastic surgery
or all that kind of stuff.
Right.
But having some kind of language that says you have, for these kinds of situations, you have to take it. Make it easy, paperwork easy, everything, you know, less administrative headaches, etc. And very few people talk about that.
And the other thing that I don't think I've ever heard of one person getting to retirement age saying, oh, I'm not going to accept Medicare. So what's the difference? Why couldn't you accept Medicare when you're 20 and make that a system? I mean, what I'm saying is like, just like what you just said, everyone I know who's older, I mean, all the people who aren't insured, all the people who are insured with these half-crocked systems that where you end up paying, you know, $20,000 a year, you know, just to be covered, and then, you know, just have catastrophic coverage and all that. But, you know, all these people are looking forward to having Medicare. So like, if people are looking forward to being covered by Medicare, why wouldn't you say like, wow, I mean, this is we have so many weird dichotomies in our consciousness here in the United States that are at odds with one another. And this is like such a primary thing. And what I even see you looking at it like, and I think you finally got what my point is like, why wouldn't everyone want to have Medicare earlier instead of waiting for it? Why wouldn't everyone want to pay into a state system at a certain amount based on your income, that helps cover your coverage, and you don't have to worry about anything about it. And knowing the doctor's getting paid appropriately, knowing the nurses are getting paid appropriately, and knowing that you're getting an appropriate care you deserve. And not everything's going to be perfect because we don't live in a perfect world. So let that go.
Exactly. Well, Michael, with that, I think we may come back to Amy Coney Barrett or Donald Trump at some other time, but let's leave it for that. And I'm Merrylin LeBlanc. You can reach me at moonwise@ksfr.org. You can listen to Moonwise on the web at ksfr.org in their podcast section, which is under the program tab. And I'm live on the air. Well, not live, because often these days with the virus, it's recorded. I'm on at moonwise@ksfr.org on Saturdays at 10:30 a.m. Mountain Time. And you can also call me, 505-690-1878. Michael?
Great. And I am Michael Bartlett. You can reach me at michael@coremichael.com, or you can call me at 505-690-3860. If you like our show, please hit the subscribe button. Please share with your friends as much as possible. If you are interested in hearing about a topic using an astrological lens, please feel free to comment, send a question. We'd be happy to incorporate it. We're just two Aquarians with Scorpio moons who just like to dive deep and look at things in a really maybe unique way. I don't know. Hopefully you enjoy it and want to tune in every week. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.